In November 1956, something happened that changed the world forever. The most powerful empire in human history, an empire that ruled a quarter of the earth, was brought to its knees in just 11 days, not by a military defeat, not by a revolution, but by a phone call. On that call, the United States delivered an ultimatum to Britain: stop your war in Egypt immediately or we will collapse your currency. We will sell every British pound we own. We will watch your economy burn. Britain had no choice. Within hours, the empire surrendered, not to an enemy army, but to its own debt. That moment, the Suez Crisis, was the final nail in the coffin of British global dominance. But here is what the history books leave out. Britain didn't fall because of that one crisis. Britain fell because for decades it had been making these exact same mistakes that America is making right now. And by 2026, those mistakes may finally catch up with us. Let me show you the pattern. Because when you see it, you will never look at the US dollar the same way again. America isn't like the British Empire. We are the British Empire and we are approaching our own 11th day. The media hides this parallel because it is too terrifying. We need to hit 1,000 subscribers to push this history lesson past the algorithm. Subscribe now. Let's look at the blueprint of collapse. To understand how Britain fell, you first have to understand the height of the cliff. In the 19th century, the British pound was not just a currency, it was the currency. When central banks in Tokyo or Buenos Aires stored wealth, they stored pounds. When contracts were written in Shanghai, they were denominated in sterling. This gave Britain a supernatural power. They could run trade deficits forever because the world needed their paper. They could fight wars on credit because everyone trusted the Bank of England. Does it sound familiar? It should. This is exactly the exorbitant privilege the United States enjoys today. But beneath the surface of this golden age, a cancer was growing. By the late 1800s, a new industrial power had risen across the Atlantic. The United States began outproducing Britain. American steel was cheaper. American factories were faster. American innovation was outpacing the old empire. So, why didn't the pound collapse right then? Because of inertia. The global financial system was wired for pounds. Changing the plumbing of the world economy is inconvenient. So, even as Britain's economic foundation turned to sand, the currency remained strong for decades. This is the danger zone. This is where America is right now. We are resting on the reputation of our grandfathers. We are trading on the gold brand equity of 1945 while our actual balance sheet looks like a disaster. Then came World War I. Britain borrowed staggering sums to fight. By 1918, they had transformed from the world's largest creditor to the world's largest debtor. They owed money to everyone, especially to the United States. But instead of downsizing their lifestyle, Britain made a fatal choice. They tried to pretend nothing had changed. They tried to keep living in the mansion after they had lost their job. In 1925, Britain made what historians call the greatest economic blunder of the 20th century. They returned to the gold standard, but they didn't just return. They returned at the pre-war exchange rate. They wanted the pound to be worth exactly what it was in 1913. Why? Pure ego. They wanted to show the world that the war hadn't hurt them. They wanted to project strength, but the math didn't work. Britain was poorer, weaker, and deeper in debt. To maintain this artificially high value, the Bank of England had to keep interest rates painfully high. This strangled the economy. Unemployment soared. British factories couldn't compete because their exports were too expensive. They sacrificed the prosperity of their own people to protect the prestige of their currency. Does that sound familiar? Look at the Federal Reserve today. They are keeping rates higher for longer to defend the dollar and fight inflation, while the interest payments on the debt consume the budget and the middle class suffocates under mortgage costs. We are strangling the real economy to save the financial system. In Britain, the dam finally broke in 1931. Speculators attacked. They saw the math didn't add up. Britain was forced off the gold standard entirely. Overnight, the pound lost 30% of its value. The prestige evaporated in 24 hours. But here's the remarkable thing. Even after this humiliation, the pound didn't die completely. Why? Because Britain still had one card left to play. A card that America is playing right now. They held their own allies hostage. How did the pound survive after the gold standard collapsed in 1931? Because of the sterling area, Britain forced its colonies, India, Australia, Pakistan, and dozens of others, to hold their national reserves in pounds. They had no choice. Britain was essentially holding its own empire hostage to prop up its failing financial system. This created artificial demand. Even though the British economy was rotting, The demand for pounds remained high because half the world was legally required to use it. America is doing something eerily similar right now. It is called the petrodollar system. Since 1904, we have effectively said to the world, if you want to buy oil, you must use US dollars. This forces countries like Japan, Germany, and China to hoard our currency, not because they trust our fiscal responsibility, but because they need energy. We have turned the global oil market into our own sterling area. But here is the lesson from history. Colonies eventually want independence. And oil-producing nations eventually get tired of taking orders. We are seeing this right now with the BRICS alliance. We are seeing Saudi Arabia accepting yuan. The hostages are cutting the chains. And while this foundation was cracking, Britain made the problem worse by doubling down on debt. By 1945, after World War II, Britain owed more money than its entire economy produced in a year. They were bankrupt. They were surviving solely on American loans. And yet, British leaders refused to downsize. They kept military bases in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. They kept spending on prestige projects. They were policing the world with a credit card. This brings us to 1956. The debt was maxed out, the colonies were restless, the economy was hollow. All it needed was one spark to burn the whole house down. This brings us to November 1956. When Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal, Britain saw it as a direct insult. The canal was their lifeline to oil. Losing it meant admitting they were no longer a superpower. So they did what empires do. They invaded. Together with France and Israel, British forces stormed Egypt. Militarily, it was a success. The troops were advancing. The objective was within reach. But they had forgotten one thing. They were broke. President Eisenhower saw the invasion as a disaster. He decided to teach Britain a lesson in realpolitik. The US government threatened to sell its massive holdings of British pounds. Simultaneously, they blocked Britain from accessing emergency cash at the IMF. Britain's foreign currency reserves began draining at a rate of $100 million per week. They were days away from a complete currency collapse. Prime Minister Anthony Eden looked at the balance sheet and realized the truth. You cannot fight a war if you cannot pay for the fuel. He ordered a humiliated retreat. The empire had been brought to heel by its own creditor. Now, look at the United States today. We are walking into the same trap. Britain's debt to GDP was over 200%. Ours is approaching 120% and climbing. We added $2 trillion to the debt this year alone. But here's the statistic that screams Suez Moment. By 2026, the Congressional Budget Office projects that interest payments on the national debt will exceed our defense budget. Think about what that means. We will be spending more to pay off bondholders than we spend to protect the nation. We will be spending more on interest than on Medicare. We are becoming a zombie nation, working solely to service the debt of the past with no capacity to fund the future. If we get into a conflict, say over Taiwan, and our creditors decide to sell our bonds, or if the bond vigilantes demand higher rates, we will face the exact same choice Britain faced in 1956, solvency or war. And just like Britain, we will find that a bankrupt nation has no choice at all. Britain's fall happened gradually, then suddenly. For 30 years, from 1920 to 1950, the warning signs were there. The debt, the industrial decline, the overreach. But because the empire still looked impressive on a map, everyone ignored the rot. Then came one crisis, just one. And in 11 days, a century of dominance evaporated. America's Suez Moment is coming. It might not be a canal in Egypt. It might be a debt ceiling crisis where Congress plays chicken one too many times and the world decides US treasuries are no longer risk-free. It might be a failed sanction where we try to freeze a rival's money and they simply use the digital yuan instead, proving we have no power left. It could be a shock we cannot even predict. But the math for 2026 is screaming. When a nation spends more on interest than defense, the game is mathematically over. You are no longer a superpower, you are an annuity for your creditors. And let me be clear about what this means for you. When a reserve currency dies, it isn't an abstract chart on Bloomberg. It is devastation for ordinary people. When the pound collapsed, British citizens watched their life savings lose value overnight. Import costs skyrocketed, the standard of living evaporated within a generation. If the dollar loses its status, everything you buy will double in price. Your mortgage rate will spike. The comfortable American middle-class lifestyle will become a memory. This isn't fear-mongering. This is history. This is exactly what happened to the last guy who held the crown. Emotional anchor block. I know this is heavy. I know part of you wants to click away and watch a cat video and pretend that America is special. That is the most dangerous instinct you have right now. The British people in 1950 felt the exact same way. They thought, we are the empire, we are untouchable. They were talking, but you have an advantage they didn't have. You have the map, you can see the cliff coming. The government isn't going to save you. They are the ones driving the bus off the edge. The media isn't going to warn you. They are paid to keep you calm. It is on you. It is your job to build a lifeboat. It is your job to diversify out of the dollar. It is your job to learn a skill that has value even if the currency fails. Don't let your family be the ones who say, we didn't see it coming. Shirera be the one who says, we were ready. The timeline is accelerating. Britain took 30 years to decline. In the digital age, America might only get 30 months. The question is not if the Suez Moment arrives. The question is whether 2026 will be our 1956. I know this is heavy to hear. I know part of you wants to click away, turn on a football game, and pretend that America is special. That is the most dangerous instinct you have right now. It is called normalcy bias, the comforting lie that tomorrow will look exactly like today. The British people in 1950 felt the exact same way. They thought, we are the empire. The sun never sets on us. They were wrong. But you have an advantage they didn't have. You have the map. You can see the cliff coming before we go over it. The government isn't going to save you. They are the ones driving the bus off the edge. The media isn't going to warn you. They are paid to keep you asleep. It is on you. It is your job to build the lifeboat. It is your job to diversify out of the paper promises of a dying empire. Don't let your family be the ones who wake up in 2026 saying, we didn't see it coming. Be the one who says, we were ready. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And right now, the rhyme is deafening. If you want the specific blueprint on how to protect your wealth during a sovereign debt crisis, the assets to hold and the traps to avoid, you need to see the next video. Subscribe right now. The clock is ticking. Class dismissed.